Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. The Torah is so inspirational. I don't know how someone can live their lives without faith. Truly. When you live without faith, it's like you're groping in the darkness. It's randomness. It's anarchy and chaos. It's survival of the fittest. I don't understand how you cannot be overcome with anxiety. I mean, unless you happen to be one of the 1%, and even then, you think the 1% don't have problems? They have more problems. You know, the Talmud says the more money you have, the more assets, the more worry you have. Right? Less assets, less worry. When you live with faith, you live with order, with structure, with a plan. But today we're going to take that plan to the next level. Today we're going to learn from a fascinating insight into today's seemingly unnecessarily long Torah portion. We'll learn a profound lesson in our own journey to our own destiny. Our own journey towards our promised land, towards your promised land. And we'll learn today how the journey to your promised land is paved with miracles. How God doesn't just put us in this world in order to survive. He puts us in this world in order to thrive, and that He's given us everything that we need in order to get there. The only obstacle we have to get past is that which is within ourselves, because whether you say you can or you say you can't, you're right. Essentially, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
We're our own worst enemies.
We can be our own worst enemies.
Or best assets.
Or our best assets. And I think of the story of one of my mentors, Rabbi Sholem Ber Lipsker, the rabbi of the Shul of Bell Harbor in Florida, who recently passed away. He was a giant of a man who took on the highly restricted city or the town or the village of Bell Harbor, a place which was seemingly inhospitable to Jewish life and to Jewish people. And he transformed it into a bastion of Jewish life, into a beacon of light, of spirituality, of inspiration, of global inspiration. When they were going out, Rabbi and Mrs. Lipsker were heading out to Bell Harbor. Well, initially to Miami. You know, when they were heading out, I'm not sure when they went out. Maybe in the '60s, they were being sent from Chabad World Headquarters. They sat in a meeting with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to them, "I want you to know." Clearly there was some anxiety. There was a lot of anxiety, and understandably so. I believe that the anxiety was primarily coming from her, from Mrs. Lipsker, and she said. She expressed her anxiety. So the Rebbe said to her, "Ich fahr doch mit euch. I'm traveling with you. You're not alone. Don't think that you're alone." This is an expression that the Rebbe said to several shluchim, emissaries that went out in those early years when it was really uncharted territory, uncharted waters. It was like Lewis and Clark, heading out west. These were the Chabad rabbis heading to Australia, heading to Florida, heading to who knows where, Nashville, Tennessee, and they were fearful. I don't want to use the word fearful. They were uncertain. And the Rebbe said to them, "I'm going with you." And then the Rebbe added something which I thought was transformational. Aber es darf sein besimcha. But it has to be with joy. Which means you must be in a state of joy. Why is that important? What's wrong if I want to be miserable? What's wrong if some people, they're happy when they're miserable? Right? So what's wrong with being miserable? There was a shliach, an emissary of the Rebbe in New Haven. I think he was a great uncle of mine at some point, and he was famous for being pessimistic, for being a naysayer, a Debbie Downer, right? Cantankerous. Is that the definition of cantankerous?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, pessimistic. I thought it meant irritable.
Down for God.
Oh, okay. So he was famous for being that, and the Rebbe would constantly encourage him to be positive, not because, and this is my understanding as we're about to learn. Not because the Rebbe just wanted to put him in a happy frame of mind, but in order for the blessings to flow, you need to be able to believe in them. If you don't believe in them, then you're personally blocking them. And that's why the state of joy is what's necessary to allow me to travel with you, says the Rebbe, in order to open the doors before you, like it says in the Torah, that God says, I'm sending my angel before you to journey before you, and so on and so forth. Yes.
Doesn't God recognize that people struggle and sometimes they're having trouble getting that joy, and He's still going to give them blessings regardless if they're struggling or not?
I think that's the test of life, Mark. I think the test of life is to be able to overcome our natural inhibitions, predispositions, and inclinations, where we're created in a certain way, and the test of life is for us to be able to reorient ourselves away from the way that we are most comfortable and to be the way we are meant to be, right? Judaism is a profound rejection of the notion that I was born this way. The way you were born is no excuse for the way you need to remain. Imagine a businessman was to say, well, I was born naked, so I'm never going to wear clothing. I was born penniless, so I'm never going to try to make a living. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. Yet we do that in our spirituality. We say, well, I was born, enjoying slanderous tales. Or I was born enjoying indulgences and, hurting others. Therefore, I'm not going to change. That's absurd. It's ridiculous. We are human beings capable and demanded of to evolve, to mature, to grow like a fine wine. All right, let's take a look at how this idea comes out of this week's Torah portion in the most beautiful way. It starts on page 1017 in the Blue Chumash, where this week's Torah portion, it's actually a double Torah portion, Mattos and Maseh, which takes us all the way through to the end of the book of Bamidbar, the book of the fourth book of the Torah, ending with culminating with Chazak v'nit chazek, strong, and may we be strengthened. The part of the portion I'd like to share with you is the overwhelming majority part of the portion, which is it starts on page 1017. On 1017, we learn about the war with Midian. Remember, the Midianites were the ones that waged war against the Jews in two portions ago. Balak was the king of Moab, and he was the one who hired the prophet of those times, the Voldemort of those days. His name was Bilam. He was the Midianite king, the Midianite prophet. He failed in cursing the Jews, but he did manage to teach the Midianites how to fight the Jews, right? And there was a terrible war. Let's take a look at what happened. Page 1017. The Torah returns to the historical narrative, continuing with the aftermath of the incident at Shittim and the preparations for Moses' death. As was seen above, God told Moses to distress the Midianites and that soon he would have them attack them directly. God now spoke to Moses saying, take revenge on behalf of the Israelites against the Midianites. Afterwards you will die and be gathered to your people. Fine. So Moses prepares for battle in verse 3. In the bold face, Moses spoke to the people saying, arm from you, righteous men from the army, that they can go do battle against Midian and carry out revenge of God against Midian. Okay. You will send 1,000 from each tribe, from all the tribes of Israel into the army. From the thousands of Israelites, 1,000 men were given over for each tribe, 12,000 men armed for battle. Right? Okay, they're going out to battle, very small army. Moses sent them 1,000 from each tribe to the army, them to the army along with Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the priest, with the sacred utensils and the trumpets for sounding in his possession. They mounted an attack, I'm doing the boldface, against Midian as God had commanded Moses, and they killed every adult male. Let's take a quick note of here, top of page 1019 in the regular print. As it happened, Bilam was the prophet, right, of Midian. Mm-hmm. Bilam was in Midian at the time. He had come to collect his fee for having caused the death of thousands of Israelites by advising Moab and Midian to entice them into the sins of idolatry and lechery. Lechery is promiscuity, right? When the Israelites attacked, he used his magical powers to make himself and the 5 kings of the Midianite confederation fly in the air. Interesting, eh? But Pinchas held up the high priest's forehead plate to them, and the divine name engraved on it nullified the power of Bilam's magic. This was like the first magic carpet, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. In this way, they killed the Midianite kings, making them fall from the air upon their own slain. Evi, Rechem, Tzur, Hur, and Reva were the 5 kings of Midian. They were all equally guilty of scheming against the Jews. and therefore will die the same way. Bilam, in the meantime, left the Midianite camp and approached the Israelite army, attempting to argue that it was useless to try to subdue Midian. If he argued, when you were 600,000 strong, you could not resist the temptation to sin with the Midianite girls, what makes you think you can now resist the same temptation when you're only 12,000 strong? The Israelites thereupon slew Bilam, the son of Beor, by the sword. This was poetic justice. Bilam had tried to usurp the Jews' weapon, their power of praying, right, the power of the mouth, by battling them with curses. The Jews in turn killed him by usurping the non-Jewish weapon, which was the sword. The Gentile weapon is the sword. The Jewish weapon is the mouth. He took our weapon, so we took his weapon in poetic justice. Okay, now starts. Okay, fine. So we win the war. The Israelites took the Midianite women and their small children captive, and they plundered all their beasts, their livestock, and all their possessions. They set fire to all the residential cities and to the castles. Right? They took the movable booty and all the living plunder of man and beast, and they brought it all, the captives, the plundered animals, and the movable booty, to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the entire community of Israel in the camp in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, opposite Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the princes of the community went out to meet them outside the camp. Okay, let's skip a little bit. Let's see what happens here. Here, now go down to page 1021. This is now the fourth reading. God spoke to Moses, saying, take account of the plunder of the captive people and animals, you together with Eleazar the priest and the heads of the paternal houses of the community. So you got to take account, take stock of the plunder of war, of the booty. You must divide this plunder equally between the warriors who went out to battle and the rest of the entire congregation, which means half to the army and half to the people. These soldiers may keep whatever movable property they captured, however, all for themselves. Okay. Now, and you must levy a tax for God. So both halves, the warriors that went out, the 12,000 soldiers, and the rest of the camp, the rest of the Jewish people, divided half, the spoils half, right? 50-50. Now, of the 50-50, each side had to give a tax to God. Take a look. And you must levy a tax for God in the half that you give to the soldiers who went out to battle, 1/500th of the people, the cattle, the donkeys, and the flock. So of the 12,000 soldiers who received half the spoils of war, the soldiers had to donate 1 out of 500 of the cattle, the donkeys, the flock, and the people to God, right? Mm-hmm. Take this tax from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a gift to God. They had to give it to the priest. From the half belonging to the rest of the Israelites, you must take not 1/500th, but 1/50th of the people, the cattle, the donkeys, the flock, and the animals as a tax, and you must give it to the Levites, the keepers of the charge of the community, as their representatives in the tabernacle of God. Now, very clear. Divide the spoils in half to this, to the warriors, and half to the rest of the camp. The half of the warriors has to be taxed 1/500th to the priest. The half that went to the rest of the people was 1/50th, which is a much higher tax, right? Yeah. It's 2% as opposed to, yeah, right? If you do the math, they paid much more to the Levites. Very good. Now the next verse should sum it up. Page 1020, middle of the page. Moses and Eleazar the priest did as God had commanded Moses. That should be the end of this idea. Middle of 1020. Moses and Eleazar the priest did as God had commanded. Wonderful. That should be the end of the idea. But now what happens is that the verse goes in on page 1020 and continues on 1023. Take a look. The plunder, which was in addition to the movable spoils that the army had pillaged, consisted of 675,000 sheep and goats. And now we're going to go into an accounting of exactly how many sheep and goats and donkeys and slaves, that their servants that they plundered. They're going to go through all the details. Mm-hmm. Instead of the Torah just saying they did as the God had commanded, the Torah now goes into the nitty-gritty, the profit and loss statements, into the bank sheets over here, 72,000 cattle and 61,000 donkeys. As for the people, that is the women who were not old enough for carnal relations with the man, there were 32,000, right? Regarding the half, that was the portion of those who went out to battle. The number of sheep and goats was 337,500. I mean, who cares? And the tax to God from the sheep and goats was 1/500th was 675, right? Because 675 is 2% of 337,500. And there were 36,000 cattle. That's a round number, of which the tax to God was 72, and 30,500 donkeys, of which the tax to God was 61, and 16,000 people, which the tax to God was 32 people. I mean, this is unnecessary. Who needs these numbers? We could have just said they did as they were commanded. Mazel tov. Have a nice day, right? Moses gave the tax, which was given to God to Eleazar the priest, as God had commanded Moses. And that was the tax from the soldier side. Then there was the tax from the rest of the people, which was 1/50th. Let's keep on going a little bit. Then Moses took the tax on the half allotted to the Israelites, which Moses had a portion for them by the men who had gone to the army. Thus, the community's half was 337,500 sheep and goats. They got half, right? 36,000 cattle. 30,500 donkeys. 16,000 people, same numbers as before. Moses took 1/50th of the Israelites, half the people, and animals, and gave them as a tax to the Levites, the keepers of the charge of the community, the tabernacle of God, as God had commanded Moses. Phew! Why do we need to know that? Like, isn't that weird? That we needed all that piece of information?
Gotta be a reason.
There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason. Now, Nachmanides tells us that Nachmanides lived 900 years ago. He tells us that the reason why the Torah tells us these details is because the Torah wants us to know that since they won the war and divided the spoils in two, between the two camps of the soldiers and the rest of the people, it took a while to do the division, to divide hundreds of thousands of heads of cattle, right? Not even one of them died. Not one of the cattle of the spoils of war. Not one of the servants died, right? Nobody had a baby. No cattle had babies. Think about it. If a cattle would have had a baby, then you got now 337,504, let's say, or 505. How are you going to take 1/5, 1/500th of that? Oh, and one, right? Exactly. If you have 72,001 cattle, or 69,999 cattle, how are you going to take 1/500th of that? So Nachmanides wants us to, it tells us that the Torah wants us to know that there was no change in the numbers. But that sounds like a miracle that is entirely unnecessary. Like, why would God do that miracle? Like what's the big deal? We had to get some sort of a cease and desist on death and procreation during the division of the spoils of war. Like, why was this even necessary? The Rabbi explains to us a very, very beautiful explanation. The Rabbi explains that the reason for this seemingly unnecessary miracle is in order to allow the spoils to be divided perfectly in the exact round numbers that we just mentioned, right? So of the warriors, 72,000 cattle, they gave 675. Of the 36,000 cattle, they gave 72. Of the 35,500 donkeys, the tax was 61. Of the 16,000 people, the tax to God, to the priest, was 32, right? So the reason for the miracle was in order for the numbers to be divided perfectly. And from here we learn the fact that the Torah needed us to know this information is for us to understand that when we are faced with our destiny, when we realize, when life pushes us in a direction and we sense that this is the way that we need to be, the time, the place, the vocation, the influence and power that we wield, and we realize that this is what I need to do right now. For example, when a person realizes that he needs to get married and he's afraid to get married. Maybe he's afraid to get married. Maybe he's afraid to take care of a wife and deal with the challenges of making a living. You know, it's easy to be single, easier, but to be married, you got to deal with relationship issues. You got to deal with financial issues. You got to deal with another person, and then they're afraid to have children. Children, oh my God, how am I going to handle children? They're going to drive me up the wall. I'm not sure if I'm going to be a good father, a good mother. Maybe I'm not going to be a good parent. And you realize that destiny's pushing you in this direction, and you're afraid. But this is your promised land. Or maybe you're a young chassid, and you realize that destiny's pushing you towards a shlichus, to becoming a Chabad house, to opening a Chabad house, to opening an institution of the Rebbe. And it's downright daunting because you got to do it in Mykonos in Greece on an island that you can only reach by boat or by plane. And you realize that you're going to be cut off from the rest of the from the rest of the world. And you're going to be wondering how I'm going to educate my kids, how I'm going to make a living, how I'm going to keep myself busy, how I'm going to maintain my sanity, right? You're going to go to Siberia or to some island off of Fiji in Micronesia, or maybe some isolated place in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Or even if you go to a place, maybe you go to a place like Texas or Florida. And you know what? It's scary. It's fearful. What's going to be? How are you going to handle it? What's going to happen when you have a challenge, when you have a problem? Right? When the spaghetti hits the fan, how are you going to handle it? The reason the Torah tells us this breakdown is because the Jewish people were on their journey to the promised land. And it could, if you had to figure out, if there was some sort of actuarial scientist, the projection report on what was going to happen, it would have looked dismal. It would have looked bleak. There were many nations, many kings, the 31 kings of the land of Israel, and there was all the nations on the way to the land of Israel. And you could have asked what kind of military colleges the Jewish soldiers went to. Did they go to West Point? Did they have any training whatsoever? You could have said, these are scholars, they're not soldiers, right? No, it's not going to happen, right? You can ask the same thing about a young Chabad rabbi. What does he know? Which business school did he go to? Which Ivy League school did he go to? Was it UPenn? Was it Stanford? Was it Columbia? Right? Harvard? Where did he go? Right? You ask a young man who has to get married, what kind of parenting advice does he have? His parents are divorced. He doesn't even know how to have a normal, healthy marriage. What kind of husband is he going to be? He's displaying some disquieting tendencies. Maybe he shouldn't get married. If you make rational projections, it's not going to look pretty. What the Torah is telling us that the Jewish people were here on the way to their promised land. And as they were, so it was necessary for God to make miracles so that they would be able to reach the promised land without obstacles, without problems along the way. God had given them a commandment. What was the commandment? Divide the spoils 1/500th. What percentage is 1/500th? 1/50th is 2%, right? 1/500 is 0.002%, I think it is. Okay. 0.002? 0.02%. Okay. So they got a command. Divide the spoils 0.02% and 0.2% and 2%, right? And they were like, how are we going to fulfill the will of God? It's too hard. It's too hard to fulfill the will of God. You get a commandment like resting on the sabbatical year, which is today's Maimonides, Rambam, the mitzvah of the day. How are we going to leave the field fallow every 7th year? How are we going to allow the competitors to thrive in the 7th year as we just leave our land fallow? We're going to ruin our business, Rabbi. Comes the Torah to teach us when God gives you a command. God is the creator of the universe. He's the creator not only of Torah, but he's the creator of science as well. And when you can meditate upon that truth, that God is not only the creator of Torah, but he's also the creator of science and physics and chemistry and money and finance and politics and war and everything else and relationships and parenting and everything else. When you recognize that, I think I've stumped everybody here mathematically. There seems to be a debate going on. He's thinking, I can tell. Okay. Couldn't be that complicated, right? Right? Yeah. So the idea here is that even though you might say, well, how are we going to fulfill this commandment if I've got 71,996 or 991 cattle? How am I going to get 1/500th of that? I'll need to get the most advanced mathematicians in the world to figure that out. Or advanced accountants, forgive me. But the difference between a good accountant and a creative accountant.
5 to 10.
So a CEO is putting out a business. He's putting out a job description. He's looking to hire a creative accountant. So the first day, a guy applies for the job. Are you a creative accountant? He says, I think so. What's 1 + 1? He says 2. He says, good, but you're not the right guy. Next day, another guy comes in. Next up, you're looking to be a creative accountant. Are you a creative accountant? He says, yeah, I think so. What's 1 + 1? He says 11. The boss says good, but not good enough. The third guy comes in and the boss says to him, what's 1 + 1? He says, boss, what do you want it to be? You're hired. Okay, so when this is the powerful message that the Torah is telling us, that the way to the journey, the path to your promised land is paved with miracles. God has already prepared the journey for you. We, in the portion of Matis Maseh, which is the journey of the Jewish people to the promised land that recounts all 42 of the stops that the Jewish people made from Egypt to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, to the promised land. As we look back at this journey in the rear view mirror in retrospect, and we see the bigger picture, hindsight is 20/20 vision. It's then that we see that God has prepared every single step of the way for us. And all that we needed to do is to get out of our own way. God is capable. Don't worry about God's abilities. Don't worry about God's logistics. He's been doing this for a very, very long time. And the fact that we're still here is proof of that. The fact that the Jewish people are still around is itself a miracle. What?
Aren't some miracles more profound than others?
Yeah, of course. Some miracles are more profound than others. But the beauty of this miracle is how insignificant it is.
Even the most insignificant thing.
Yeah, exactly. That God's not only into the big stuff, he's into the small stuff. That some donkey didn't kick the bucket, right? Didn't kick the bucket while they were dividing the spoils, doing the counting. Can you imagine? The guy gets the memo. Moses, bad news. A donkey died. Now we get trouble. Because how are we going to do the 500th, right? How are you going to do that? No donkeys died. It was this insignificant miracle, which is so incredibly inspiring as we realize that God is almighty, God is all powerful, nothing is too big and nothing is too small for Hashem. And our job is to read this portion, to learn from history, how God carried us on his wings into the promised land, and God will do the same for us today in my little life, whether it's my next step or my next journey, whether it's marriage, whether it's business, whether it's your spiritual growth, whether it's your shlichus, whatever it is that you're doing, don't be afraid. Al tira, whenever there is a clash between a mitzvah and reality, who do you think is going to win? The world will tell you reality wins. When President Trump is allegedly criticizing Israel, rumor has it, for being too aggressive now with the Arabs, then you could easily say, well, we have to tone it down. We have to be gentle with our bloodthirsty enemies. But no, the Torah tells us that as long as we stay true to the teachings of Torah, as long as we stay true to the values of Torah, to the way the Torah teaches us when it comes to facing our enemies, when someone rises up to attack you, you must kill them first. And you know what's going on there in Syria is that there was a captured Syrian soldier who was attacking the Druze. He was captured, and he admitted that he was actually a Syrian soldier, not just a renegade clan.
Bedouin.
Not just a Bedouin. He was actually a Syrian soldier. And he said the instructions they were given was to liberate Jerusalem. We're on the way to Jerusalem. So Israel here is fighting a war that is defending not just the Druze over there in Syria, but Israel is really defending herself. And when we stand true and strong to the values, the teachings, the directives of Torah, then the world melts in the face of Torah, just like the fertility rates and the mortality rates of the cattle and the spoils of war were unchanged in order to allow for the correct accounting. Your journey to your promised land too cannot clash with Torah, because Torah is the source code of the universe. There can be no conflict by definition. Don't be afraid.